Welcome everyone. If you're here to talk about the Levelling Up Fund and preparing for round two, then you're absolutely in the right place. My name's Andrew Laird and I'm the Managing Director of Mutual Ventures, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Sally Grindrod-Smith, who's the Assistant Director for Planning and Regeneration at West Lindsey Council. Sally, if you want to just wave there and say hello. Sally at this stage is a proper expert on levelling up and what it takes to go through this process. Sally worked on the West Lindsey bid with my colleague Mark Bandalli, who is also here. Mark will be able to add some of his insights as well. So hopefully that all sounds interesting. So just in terms of housekeeping, the way to access the questions is to use the Q&A function. There are quite a lot of people on this, so we're not having people asking their questions live, but please do put your questions in the Q&A section, and we will endeavour to get to those questions. There's one question already saying, will the video be available after the live stream? Yes. It's being recorded right now, and we will make that available within the next couple of days that you can share with colleagues as well. So just in terms of what we're going to cover today, so introductions, we've done those. Just to say a little bit more about Mutual Ventures. So we're a consultancy that specialises in public services. So we've got a long history of working with councils and the third sector, supporting the development of growth of organisations and services. And we also do quite a bit of work with central government, helping them to work with local government to try and deliver programmes. And our particular expertise in terms of levelling up is in the development of business cases. And as I'll talk through, the application form for levelling up funding is very much like a business case. It has all of the same elements. I'm also going to talk through what we know and what we don't know about the fund. So there's some things that we know from the prospectus. There are some things that we know from our experience in round one. And with regards to round two, there are some things that we don't know yet, and we'll be absolutely clear about those. Then we're also going to talk about what lessons Mark, Sally and I have learned from our experience of round one. Certainly in our wider experience of supporting a range of councils, we didn't get everything right the first time round, and I think that's fair and honest to say, but there are lessons that we've learned, and I think it's important that in a process like this, you keep learning the lessons. And then I'm going to hand over to Sally, who's going to talk through the West Lindsey experience of the bidding process from the council's perspective. Then I'll say a little bit about the support that Mutual Ventures could offer you should you need it. Then we'll open it up for some Q&A and we'll wrap up after that. And my ambition is to let everybody away at 5 to the hour to give you a chance to get to your next meeting and maybe make a cup of tea in the meantime as well. So in terms of what we know about levelling up, so it won't have escaped anybody's attention that a major central government department, which used to be MHCLG, has been renamed the Department for Levelling Up Communities and Housing. So there is no doubt that this is likely to be the key driving force for the UK government's domestic agenda. There are already a number of funds. The Levelling Up Fund is only one of them, which are very much aimed at trying to support and develop the regions and areas within the UK and to support a more balanced economy and better life chances for everyone. It's quite a complicated fund with a very wide remit, so it's jointly managed by the Treasury, the Department of Transport, because transport projects can play a major part, and of course the Department for Levelling Up Communities and Housing. The total funding available is 4.8 billion, and that would need to be spent before 24 to 25. The projects that went in for round one, which closed on the 18th of June, the expectation is that once those projects are announced, and we would expect that quite soon, I would hope, there needs to be 600 million of that spent within this financial year. Round 2, the spending is not likely to start until next year. And like I said, it's designed to support regions, cities, towns, communities with, and this is a really important point, not just the physical infrastructure, but the social infrastructure as well. So there has been quite a lot of commentary recently about how a lot of the projects that are coming through are about bridges, roads, refurbishing railway stations, town centres, but actually this is very much about social capital as well. And one of the very key appointments that has been made over the last couple of weeks is appointing Andy Haldane, who used to be the chief economist at the Bank of England, as the head of a Levelling Up task force. And if you look back on anything he has said recently or over the past year, he talks a lot about it not just being about physical infrastructure, but being about social capital as well. So bids that are brought forward will need to show how this is really supporting people and individuals, as well as supporting general economic output. The full prospectus for the fund was launched earlier this year, and that's easily available on the Treasury website. A quick Google will get you straight there. And there's lots of good information in that as to what sort of themes the fund is focusing on. And as I said, round 1 has already been and gone, and we're expecting round 2 to launch quite soon. In terms of what you're able to submit, there's been a little bit of confusion in some of the conversations that I've had on this, but as a local authority, you're able to submit a number of bids that's determined by the number of MPs who lie within your constituency. So if you're in the lucky position that you have a number of MPs within your council area, and by council area, we're talking about single tier authorities and district councils primarily. So if you have a number of MPs that fall entirely within your constituency, then that is the number of kind of core bids which you can make. If an MP's constituency overlaps with a neighbouring council, then you need to agree between you which council will represent that MP's allocated bid, if you like. In addition to that, you can also put in bids for transport schemes above and beyond the allocation based on the number of MPs. So those can be a bit bigger. They can be up to 50 million as opposed to 20 million for the other ones. And they must be submitted with the support of the relevant transport authority. And we might talk about that a little bit later on. The government has also categorized and prioritized council areas. So those in category 1 or in priority tier 1 will get £125,000 capacity support. You should have already got that. All of the councils in Wales and all the councils in Scotland and Northern Ireland will also get that, but it's only the category 1 areas within England. So you should have got that funding, and that funding is there to support you to start your thinking about your levelling up bid. Package bids are permissible, and by that we mean it doesn't just have to be a road or a new community centre. If there is a link, an overarching vision which links a number of distinct projects together, then a single bid can cover up to three projects. But it's really important that there is that golden thread that links the projects together. Joint bids across council boundaries are also permissible, and that would allow you to increase the amount based on the allowed amount for each individual bid. So if you have a bigger project which transcends a couple of councils, then that is something worth considering, and it's allowed. And then the final point is that MP support is absolutely critical. So it's the very first question the application form asks. The way this has been designed is very much around MPs and making sure that each MP is able to support a bid relevant to their constituency. So getting that MP support is important. And just the main thing that we don't know is exactly when round 2 will launch. So There are a number of events coming up which traditionally governments would link things like this to. So on the 27th of October is the next budget statement and the announcement of the comprehensive spending review. It would certainly make sense to launch a second round of levelling up at that time, but we don't know. There has been no announcement so far. So just in terms of the application itself, I'd like to take some time to talk you through that. So what you see on the screen are the 5 cases of the traditional Treasury Green Book 5-case business case model. It has 5 very distinct areas where the Treasury, and remembering that this is one of the key departments that will actually be assessing bids, this is how they look at business cases. So there's a strategic case, which allows you to explain whether there is a compelling case for change. Is there a real challenge that needs to be addressed? There is an economic case, which is all about value for money. What are the options? Which one provides the best bang for buck in terms of government spending? There is the commercial case. Is it commercially viable? Do you have partnerships that you need? How will you procure them? How will you put those contracts in place? There's a financial case, which is exactly what it says in the tin. Is this affordable? What are the payment milestones? How much in total is actually going to need to be spent on this? And then you have a management case, and that's all about delivery. So what does the timeline look like? What are the activities? Do you have the right resources in place? And are there any independencies and risks, etc.? So the application form doesn't follow the structure of this exactly, but it almost does. So it's broken down into 3. The first is strategic fit. This is essentially the 5-case strategic case. And like I said earlier, the very first thing they ask for is MP endorsement. So you need that letter of support from your MP. And this very much links to the second point, which is about stakeholder engagement and support. They want to know, and you'll have to write this down and actually describe it. How have you engaged with the key people who are essential to this bid? And that includes the MPs, but it includes a whole range of other actors. So are there other public sector organizations that need to be engaged? Are there key third sector partners? Are there key private sector partners? Do you need to work with developers? What about local community groups? And you have to describe the way that you've engaged. So obviously over the past 18 months, having in-person town hall meetings, etc., is difficult. So have you done it virtually? What's your plans to kind of do more of it? And then under this bit, they also want to know about anything that's controversial. And it's really important that you're honest about that, because there isn't any project of this size that hasn't some sort of controversy around planning or something. So it's just important to note those and to explain how you're managing that. Then the next point is the case for investment. And this is where you've got the opportunity to really set out what those local challenges are. So this is where the story that you're telling through the bid really needs to come through. So what are those local challenges? Are there things specific to your area that have been decades-long challenges that there just hasn't been a solution for? You know, is there a market failure? Is there some reason why the world left to its own devices is not solving these challenges? And that's where you need to really make the case that government investment, central government investment, is needed in order to be the unlocker of other funding, the unlocker of opportunity, the catalyst for other actors within the area to actually get involved. So that's really important. And then the final point under strategic fit is alignment with local and national context. So there are lots of strategies. Central government will have its plans, will have what it's stated its aims are. Your local area, including if you're in a devolved administration area, will have its own strategies. What you need to do with this part of the application form is show that what you're planning to do has a golden thread that fits neatly within your local strategy and within the national strategy as well. The next section is value for money, and this is very much reflected. This reflects the economic case of the 5-case business model. So if we talk it through, the first thing that they ask is that you provide evidence that the information and data that you're using is relevant and is reliable and is from a reliable source. So is it from a national database? How have you worked out that information? It's also about whether that information is appropriate to what you're proposing. So if your whole project is about increasing footfall within a town centre, for instance, then if you're just producing lots of information about air quality or something else, then that or transport links from your town to a major city, then the two don't link. So there has to be a very linked element there, and this bleeds into the second point, which is effectiveness of proposal in addressing problems. So in the strategic fit bit, if you have very eloquently set out a range of problems and then your proposals have very little to do with addressing those problems, then it's not a very strong bit. And that seems obvious, but we have seen it, and particularly it happens when people try and shoehorn projects that they've been trying to get funding for years, and they see this as an opportunity. You need to be very ruthless that the major problems that your area is facing, that each of the things you're asking for funding for directly address that. The final three boxes are where it gets into the complicated analysis of demonstrating value for money. And it's all about looking at what the economic costs of what you're proposing will be, and then looking at the benefits as well. Some of those benefits you'll be able to monetize. So you'll be able to say, this will be delivered, and we have a methodology which demonstrates it will deliver this amount of value to the area in terms of jobs, in terms of other things. Other things will be less easy to monetize, and there is a section where you can outline those as well. And this is quite a big change that's happened within the Treasury over the past year or so. They've been working on updates to the Green Book, which is the kind of huge guide to developing really good business cases, that they are more ready now to accept that not everything is monetizable, which for the Treasury is a big step. So if there are things that you can do that will have a really good social impact and will help people's health and well-being, but you can't quite put a number on it, there's still a place there where you can put that in. But the whole driver of this section is landing on a single number, which is what's known as the benefit cost ratio. So what the economists in the Treasury will want to see is, for their investment, what are they going to get back? So if they invest £1, what do they get back? And obviously, if the return is less than £1, then that's not a very good return. So you need to be over 1 at least, but a good return is anything over 2, really. So there isn't a set guide on this, but you should be able to demonstrate, and this is something we can help you with, that the investment that the Treasury is making, you can show that actually the return that the UK government will get is much higher than that, and that's the really important bit of this section. And then finally, the third section is deliverability. Now this combines the final 3 cases of the 5-case model, so financial, commercial, and management, along with monitoring and evaluation. So if we consider financial first, that's about costs, that's about milestones, that's about, are you getting funding from other places? You may have noticed that at least 10% of the funding has to come from elsewhere. Maybe that's from the council, maybe that's from an external source. The really strong bids will go higher than 10%. I mean, obviously government wants to see as much additionality as they call it as possible when assessing these bids. And within that financial case, you'll also want to talk about any gaps that you have in your finances at this point and how you intend to fill those. The second part is about commercial, and this is about partnerships. So are you able to do this on your own? In which case you may not need additional contracts, but it's very likely that for your project or your bid or the package of projects within your bid that you're going to need to work with others. So how is that going to be arranged? How is it going to be procured? Is it a situation where quite a lot is being delivered outside of the council, and just how will that work? And if you don't have that in place, then it's about describing what process you will go through. On the management case, this is really deliverability. So this is about your implementation plan. So your Gantt chart that shows all of the activities, it shows the milestones, it shows dependencies. But a key part of this as well, which is really important, is it asks about who will be delivering this. So who in your team that you're proposing has the right skills and experience? If you don't have the right skills and experience, where are you going to get it from? Because some of these projects are quite complex. And as you would imagine, as an investor, central government wants to know that if it gives this money and it provides it, is the right team in place and is the right plan in place. And then finally, monitoring and evaluation. If you thought that you were escaping that, you're absolutely wrong. So we might talk a little bit about that later on with Sally, but it's important that there is a proportionate plan, and that's a word that they use, proportionate plan, for monitoring and evaluating the impact of this investment. So just moving on now to lessons that we've learned from round one, and this includes working with Sally and the team at West Lindsey. It's really important to start your thinking early. So it really is never too early to start engaging with stakeholders and start coming up with ideas. When they fired the starting gun on round one, we only had 10 weeks between that and submitting the bid. Now, if at that point, you're only starting to think about what your ideas might be, with every week that passes, that's a week that you're not actually writing the bid and doing the economic analysis and preparing the implementation plan. So it is never too early to start prepping that. And bearing in mind, my best guess, and I could be completely wrong here, so I'm going to stick my neck out and say it would be a good opportunity for the government to launch round two on the 27th of October alongside the budget. I have no idea if they will do that, but it is possibly likely. Now, that means that you've got a month between now and then to start your thinking. And then there will be some sort of timeline. Central government aren't always appreciative of Christmas and the fact that people need a break. So just get started as early as you can. Put together a committed bid team. So once you've decided what your kind of long list of options are, get the right people within the council engaged and make sure that they have time to work with this. And if you've got gaps in capability, make sure that you know how you're actually going to fill those. And then do the vision thing up front is important. There's been there were a few projects there were a few bids that we worked on that when we arrived on scene, on site, the bid was just a collection of largely unconnected projects that the council had been trying to get funded for some time. I should make it clear that this wasn't West Lindsey, this was another group. West Lindsey were much more organized, but the bid has to be coherent and it has to be pushing towards a single vision. Now that doesn't mean it can't have different elements, but you can't just have 3 completely different projects that you've been wanting to get funded for ages if there's not a connecting vision. Engaging with stakeholders early on, I've already talked about this quite a bit actually. successful bids require strong evidence of support. But the key thing here is to make sure that the people who will be essential to not only winning the bid, but delivering it are engaged up front. So your finance teams in the council, your MP, local organisations that will have to be supportive. There's nothing that turns people off more than being asked at the last minute if they'll endorse something when they would have actually liked to have been involved in it. So do that stakeholder map up front and make sure that you don't put all the effort in only to misstep at the end when you realize that you should have involved somebody. The second point is about the additionality. So within the bid, you need to show that this money that you're asking government for will unlock other money and be a catalyst for other things. That additionality word is a word that's used a lot. So what they're not looking for is a bid that you put in for 20 million to do something, and that's the kind of limit of it. Maybe you scrape together 10% from the council, but it's supposed to be something that will unlock other activity, other investment within an area. And then balancing ambition with realism. We've seen a lot of really fantastic ideas and have been very happy to work with councils to help test them. But sometimes the really ambitious ones just don't pass muster and actually are too ambitious. We're all about being ambitious and being really ambitious for areas, but it's important that you remember that it's very kind of focused, the Treasury officials that you're trying to convince. So if you're presenting a real blue sky idea without much behind it, then they're not going to be convinced by that. And finally, think about the legacy of your bid. So for some government programs, what happens is that they provide funding and that runs for a couple of years. Once the funding runs out, the program stops and everything disappears and everything goes back to normal. That can't be the case here. So you need to be thinking about what things are being put in place with this funding that are going to last for a long time and keep delivering benefit. So that's what I mean there by legacy. And then that final point is about understanding and mapping your council's internal approval process. Reason this is an important point is we certainly work with a council that dropped the ball a bit on getting financial director sign up. And that was something that put everybody under a lot of pressure right at the end. So just make sure that you understand that. Then finally, just give you an idea of the sort of support that we've provided to councils. So Sally will speak in a second, but we provided within West Lindsey what we've called here level 1 support, which is quite intensive support. So Mark and our team held the pen essentially on the bid. We worked with Sally and her team very closely, gathering information, discussing ideas. The council led on the engagement of key stakeholders, but we did a lot of the research, the economic analysis, the narrative development, and then level 2 and 3 are progressively lighter touch from the external support perspective. So on level 2, this is how we had worked with Newham and with Bromley as well. So the council holds the pen, as it were, but we in both of those areas took responsibility for one of the areas. So it might have been value for money, it might have been the strategic case, but the council had identified that it had a lack of capacity to do with a particular thing. And then level 3 support, which we provided in Brighton and also Ealing, was more of a QA function. So the council did most of the work and we provided critical friend support on that. So I am going to stop sharing. And Sally, I'm going to hand over to you now just to talk a little bit about your experience at West Lindsey.
No problem. Morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. Just going to get a couple of notes up to talk through with you this morning. So I'm Sally Grindrod-Smith, as Andrew said, and I'm the Assistant Director of Planning and Regeneration here at West Lindsey District Council. So we're a very small rural district in Lincolnshire, for those of you that are not familiar with us. In fact, we're the 17th most sparsely populated area in England. We do have Gainsborough, a town at the centre of our district, just over 200,000 people, and that's our administrative centre. But in general, we're a small rural district. When details of the Levelling Up Fund were published in March of this year, we found ourselves sitting in the priority 2 category, as Andrew set out. All areas are put in different priorities. We're disappointed to find ourselves in priority 2, particularly having missed out on previous rounds of the Future High Street Fund and the Towns Fund. And even at that early point, we were engaging with our MP, sort of understanding what it meant to be in priority 2. But a quick analysis of the methodology note clearly showed that we had some comparable challenges across the district, particularly in the data sets relating to economic recovery, growth and regeneration. And with work on the growth and regeneration of Gainsborough already underway, we knew we needed to be really ambitious, stick our heads above what was a priority 2 parapet and do our best to put a really outstanding bid together. We knew that, you know, a really quality bid was the only way we had any chance of jumping the queue in reality. So as ambitious as we were and we are, we're also really realistic and recognised immediately that in order to do our very best and deliver a really quality bid, we'd need to secure some external partner support, particularly with the business case development and bid writing. And by mid-March, we'd worked up a spec for that support, which Mutual Ventures responded to by the end of the month. And using our emergency decision-making powers that we particularly sort of honed throughout the pandemic, we'd agreed a resourcing strategy and contracted with Mark and the team. And I sort of did this last week and said, thankfully, by this point in life, schools were back open and the hard work could start without my 3 small children sat here behind us, proving, you know, adding extra challenge to what was quite a tight 10-week process. So Thriving Gainsborough 2024 is what emerged through the following 10 weeks, and our bid for funding focuses on the regeneration of Gainsborough Town Centre. So this area and the surrounding wards in Gainsborough are ranked amongst the top 10 most deprived in the country, and our bid represents a single project comprising of aligned and coherent interventions, which includes the construction of a 4-screen cinema and associated retail and leisure space, the redesign and redevelopment of public realm, including new green spaces, which are really lacking in the centre of town. Furthering the work of our historic regeneration programme, we have some funding from the National Lottery Townscape Heritage Initiative, but it's fairly restricted. There's huge potential to improve the townscape with further funding. The refurbishment of the central bus station, including a wayfinding strategy. I think as Andrew and Mark and the team found out, Gainsborough is a pretty challenging place to navigate your way around, and therefore we're really not maximising that footfall. And lastly, the regeneration of vacant living spaces above commercial premises is something that we'd already begun the foundations and aspired to go further. So Mutual Ventures supported the council to develop these interventions, and a key part of this process was through a facilitated theory of change workshop. So we brought together colleagues from across the council, used existing research, reviewed performance and data, and considered the findings of quite a wide range of stakeholder engagement, which really helped us pin down and understand in black and white significant areas of market failure that we hoped a coherent bid would start to address. Since the submission of our bid in June, we've taken the opportunity to reflect on the lessons learned during that 10-week period. And in terms of what went well, our bid reflects significant thinking and work that had already happened around the town's place-based narrative and strategy. So in this respect, we were ready to go in a lot of ways, and we understood and our stakeholders understood what some of the challenges were. So as we brought together the evidence base throughout the bid process, this meant we had the basis of the strategic case in place, albeit there was work to do to articulate that through the bid process. Our interventions then were developed in detail, informed by some of the previous work, as well as support from our Section 151 officer, who was able to test and challenge our assumptions and provide confidence in the costs that we were factoring in and into the value for money model. from early on in the process, we developed a clear and compelling and ambitious story, which we really used throughout to leverage support from our stakeholders and our partners. And we really brought them with us through the process, which in the end led to quite a robust package of supporting statements that were in place for our bid submission. And all the way through, we were clear about the council's decision-making governance. So I think the fact that we took everybody with us on that journey and we'd articulated the stages where decisions were needed certainly helped us. It wasn't without challenge. We certainly faced a challenge around lack of data that we held or targets for improvement, particularly around sustainability. It's clear, and we've learned that although we have ambitions around net zero, it's probably not as embedded as we would have liked in our processes, and our options appraisals and requirements for intervention are not as well developed in this area. So it's certainly something for us to work on. Although we've seen huge benefit from involving our Section 151 and finance business partners, their feedback to us was that they wanted to be involved even earlier, right from the development of that early theory of change process would probably have been ideal. One of the most important decisions we did get right early on was the need for support in developing that business case and bid writing. And I think that helped us get our bid submitted ahead of the deadline, thankfully. But we did allow and ensure that kind of programme management meant we had adequate time for quality assurance and detailed review by all parties. We identified risks and issues along the way, nice and early in the process, so we were able to take key decisions in a timely manner and make any changes needed as and when required. Although Andrew kindly said I was an expert in this process, we don't know if our bid's going to be successful in securing the funding allocation, and who knows what recent changes to the Minister and etc. will mean about government thinking. But as we've reflected on the process, we're really clear that the process of developing a bid has accelerated our thinking internally within the council. We've created a really robust theory of change, and we've brought together an even better evidence base than we had at the start. And essentially, we've got a business case that we can use for future funding opportunities or thinking about our own internal capital programme. And interestingly, the feedback I've had from colleagues in our management team is that they now also feel better equipped with resources and experience to drive the work on our continued regeneration of the district. So who knows what the outcome will be, but essentially it's been a really useful process. So hopefully that overview gives you a bit of an insight into what we've been through, and I'm sure we can talk through some of the questions that are popping up.
Excellent, Sally, thank you so much for that. So we've got some questions coming through here. So the first one's around what sort of cash match funding do we need, and can the match funding include help in kind from partners? Mark, can you?
Yeah, sure. That? So just in terms of match funding, as Andrew said, 10% is within the LUF prospectus as the guidance. It certainly shouldn't be less than that, and I think you should treat 10% as a minimum. In terms of what that can be made up of, a couple of examples include land values. For those, say if it's local authority land, the value of that, as long as it's been valued recently and is at market rate, can be used. Sally, just in terms of West Lindsey, there were private partners who were willing to invest. Yep. So that's another good example, as well as sort of grant funding from other programs which can be sort of put into the pot. So it doesn't have to be one source. In fact, it's likely and beneficial if it's numerous sources coming together from various sources, which actually, when put together, are all pointing in the same direction in terms of. But
it's not. It's not in kind support, so you can't. It needs to be cash, doesn't it?
Yes, it needs to have demonstrable financial value. So in kind you'd struggle to put a value to that. So I think yes, it would have to be cash or assets.
Thank you, Sally. So question that I had for you links up with a question that's come through here, which about how prepared were your various schemes before the fund launch, and the question that's come through, it's from an anonymous attendee, but was it always clear that this would be your preferred project, and was there any political challenge to it? So I guess those questions could have the same answer, you know, how prepared were you, and how difficult was it to land on the schemes that you did?
And I think it was mixed, really. So we have an overarching project with a number of interventions, and we were clear that the anchor of that would be the delivery of a new cinema, but that wasn't sufficient to leverage the step change that we really not wanted to see. So some of it was less clear, and we actually got quite a long way through the process and ruled out one element of the project proposals, because once we'd gone through the sort of assurance process, it just didn't fit. So some more developed than others. I think as we worked through the detail required in the business case, it became really evident which bits were strong enough to be included, and we were really mindful of taking forward a comprehensive package without any weakness. And I think when you go through the guidance, it's really important that there is one single coherent message, and if you need to be really honest with yourselves about what any elements of weakness could actually undermine your full fundamental bid. So that's how we dealt with it, really. And it felt at the time, Mark and I agonised over dropping one element of the programme, but I think it was the right decision to do. Although it was challenging, the process helped us to get that decision in place.
Great, thank you. And then Mark, there's a question around responsibility for the financial case, and internal teams often have resource problems to try and push it through, and then specifically are specialist accountants needed? I mean, I don't think they are, but maybe you can say a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, this is about identifying the costs associated with the interventions within the application. So, I mean, in West Lindsey, Sally, we work very closely with your team and your project managers who have expertise and an understanding on how much things would cost to deliver, and the sources and the cost of goods and services. So I would argue you don't necessarily need an accountant. I think councils should have a pretty good understanding of what the cost of the interventions would be. Where we find there's often a bit of a gap in expertise, or just confidence, lack of confidence, is in the economic modelling, particularly challenging around putting financial values to things. So, but in essence, Sally, I'd be interested in your view, but I don't see the need for accountants per se.
No, and you're right. I think we dealt with it in that way. So the way in which we built it up was that the interventions each identified their own costs, if you like. So for the cinema, we had QS costs around the development and what that would be. Our section 151 sort of assured those costs and checked the process that we'd been through to get them in place, but it was very much the economic model that left us scratching our heads, and that was the piece we needed Mutual Ventures guidance on, really, about how we quantified the benefits and turned those actual hard financials into an economic appraisal.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think when you're thinking of the financial numbers element of this, it's not really an accountancy challenge. It's an economic modelling challenge, and that's where it's important to have those bits. There's a quick question here, which is very kind, and I promise this is a real question. Are mutual ventures on any frameworks that councils could use if we were interested in procuring you? The quick answer is yes. There's a number of frameworks, but we're on the government's management consultancy framework 3, which lot 7's health, social care communities that any public body can use. So Sally, a question for you. So one that I had, and then also a linked one. So question, useful to know if there was any difference between the colour of your MP and your local council. I think the answer is largely no. Yeah. But then my question, so both it's a Conservative run council, but also a single Conservative MP who's almost coterminous in that area. So whilst, if you want to say anything on that, just also
the only difference was our ward members were very opposition. So in principle, yes, it's straightforward. And there were some very local challenges that we worked through.
Okay, and on that then, so how important was the support of your MP, and how did you engage with the MP, but also with elected members as well?
And right from the sort of publication of the announcement around levelling up, we were in contact with our MP. He's been in place for many years. It's a fairly stable seat that he holds. But he was really keen and challenged us on, what were we going to do about this? He really wanted to get under the skin of why we were a priority 2 area, why we hadn't previously received any towns funding. So we were sort of pushing at an open door for really early conversation. He spends a lot of time within the district and within the town, so we met and we walked around the area and we articulated some of the challenges and some of the opportunities, and then built a regular dialogue every couple of weeks from there. We sort of gave the MP some questions to pose back in Parliament, some kind of corridor conversations that might help us shape the bid and understand a little bit more about what government were looking for. From a local member perspective, like I say, the ward members in Gainsborough are in opposition, and that does present us with some challenges, but we set out when we took the decision to make the bid some really clear elements and stages at which point we would engage with them. We spent a couple of weeks developing up our initial kind of concept for the bid and what that would look like, and then we had a full member workshop which most of the ward members attended, and we did that virtually in an evening to get the best possible attendance, and then followed that up with a lot of conversations and a lot of one-on-one work in the background, really. And there were some challenges along the way, particularly around things like car parking and whether or not, you know, the balance between public realm and car parking is something that we spend a lot of time talking about. So I would suggest it's just time and planning and sort of legwork in the background, having those conversations. We brought together our 2 main committees in the end to determine the bid that was submitted, both our finance committee and our policy committee, which is made up of a broad spectrum of members as well. So we knew the end point was sign off of both the strategy and the financial case before a submission was made, and members knew they had an opportunity at that point to really get into the detail and challenge us on what was going to be submitted.
Great, thank you. So just to deal with a few more questions here, the delivery timescale is very challenging, especially if you need planning permission. Do you think the March 2024 deadline for spend non-transport projects might change? I don't know. I mean, my assumption reading this now, Mark, and Sally, you will have a view. Is it not March 2025 that we think?
It's the term of this Parliament.
Yeah.
With the last election being in 19, so I think it's around the 24.
Yeah.
March, April 24.
It's a good question. So the answer to that is we know what round 1 was, and I've no idea what they'll do with round 2. I'm not sure if they know themselves at this stage. Sally, can I ask you about engaging with the county council? Did you have to do that, and how did you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the level of engagement depends on the type of project you're bringing forward, but we really saw this as an opportunity to build those relationships and build that sort of environment that we wanted to work in. So yeah, we engaged with them. We managed to get them to actually allow a project officer to work with us on one of the particular elements. So she became our advocate really for the projects within the county. She spent time on site with us and really developed up a comprehensive element of that bid. And I think that bit of relationship building really paid dividends for us. We also spent time at a strategic level with the leader and the politician and our MP in a sort of county council forum, so that everybody was clear about what it was we were bringing forward. And I think a key element of that for me, and involving the local enterprise partnership as well, was that I wanted to see a Lincolnshire view on levelling up, so that there was a key theme across all of the Lincolnshire proposals. And we had a number of areas in priority 1. So I kind of felt like I was banging on the door a little bit to keep our proposal on an even footing. Yeah. I think we did get that comprehensive message about what levelling up for Lincolnshire could mean. So that was a vital part of it, really.
Yeah. So I've got a question here on any advice for councils that might have a different political leadership between MP and council. We're a red wall area that flips very regularly, so it's easy for things to be highly political with lots of challenges. I really sympathise with that. I think the strategies we've used have been around involving everyone early and getting people on board so that it's a win for everyone. And actually, however people want to present it, it's really involvement. But what I would say as well is that I've seen better in some areas. I've seen better working between, say, a a Conservative MP in a Labour council than in some, or vice versa, than in some areas, not West Lindsey, in some areas where it's the same colour and you would think it would work really well. It can be really fractious and a lot of internal competition, and that it's not always easier. And actually MPs and elected members quite often don't see eye to eye regardless of party. So the only thing I can say there is early engagement and finding ways for everybody to be able to present it as a win, essentially. Sally and Mark, both of you really, what about kind of using the other bits of the council, and at what point to bring them in? So I'm thinking particularly about finance teams, because they will have a big influence on this. So how did you engage with them, and was that engagement sufficient?
So when we took the decision to make the bid, that was a decision of our management team, and all, you know, critical decisions within the authority go through that route. And when we took that decision, we agreed a sort of shift in responsibilities and coverage at that point, because we knew across the council we'd have to resource things slightly differently. We were still emerging from the pandemic. We still had different emergency planning responsibilities. So although I led the bid with our chief exec, that meant a shift of responsibility across colleagues in more operational and commercial services. So that really helped us set the tone organisationally that this was something we were going to commit to together. And then that helped flow down into other areas when we needed support from finance or procurement or communities team. And like I said, really the learning was that people wanted to be involved even sooner. I almost hung back a little, feeling like I was hassling people on a day-to-day basis, but I think people got a lot out of the process and probably would have got even more and felt more buy-in if they could have been involved earlier. So I think that was my learning. The sooner the better from everybody, really.
Great. And then Mark, anything to add from that, from either the West Lindsey project or other projects that you've been involved in?
Yeah, I mean, just on the West Lindsey one, building on what Sally said, you know, engaging with these corporate partners such as procurement or legal and so on, the groundwork that Sally did really did pay off. When we did need to engage with procurement, for example, they were aware of what was going on, what the intentions of the bid were, and we very quickly were able to develop, for example, a procurement strategy covering the whole of the bid. That wouldn't have been possible had they not been warmed up and aware of what was going on. And that's an example that was replicated across legal, planning, property, and so on. So, you know, that groundwork really did pay off hugely, because timescales are tight and we needed their involvement, and they were on hand really, which was great.
Yeah. So got a question here. Just tell me I'm going crazy if I've already answered this one, but please can you give a view on what impact the High Court challenge over prioritisation of areas may have on the round 1 announcement and round 2 launch? I haven't dealt with that one yet, have I? No, good. Okay, great. I'm not going mad. Really good question. So at the end of August, towards the end of August, permission was given for a challenge to the methodology used for prioritization, that it may have been advantaging certain areas. I do not know what the impact of that will be. What I do know is that I've listened to a lot of commentary from independent organizations like the Institute for Government, and the view that they're saying is that that the methodology makes choices, as in choosing to focus on overall economic impact rather than areas of deprivation, etc. But that is a arguable, legitimate choice. And I think that there are some councils who had considered a challenge who have decided not to pursue it. So I don't know what the impact of that will be. I know that it is that the neutral views that I've heard are that it's more defensible than maybe some other things that have happened in the past. So I'm not sure about the answer to that one, but it's a really pertinent question, and I guess we will find out next month if they're able to make announcements or not. So I'm going to draw things to a close as promised, to give people a chance to get to their next meetings. We will be sending around the link to the video as well as any supporting materials as a follow-up to this, and do feel free to get in touch if you'd like a conversation. We'd be very happy, Mark and I, to do a pro bono workshop with you, just to kind of help you think through ideas, no strings attached. So if you're interested in that, then please do get in touch. But I do come back to the point that it's never too early to start planning for round 2 of Levelling Up. So with that, I will close and say thank you so much, particularly to Sally and also Mark.